Welcome, everyone, to our journey into the grand narrative of the world economy. Today, we venture back to the very origins, to an era predating cash, credit, or coins, to decipher the primal economic impulses that forged human civilization. Our story commences not in a bustling marketplace, but within the nascent networks of human interaction, where the imperative to exchange was born from both stark necessity and burgeoning opportunity. Envision a world devoid of a universal measure of value, where every transaction was a deeply personal and often complex negotiation. This was the realm of barter, the direct swap of goods and services. My obsidian blade for your basket of wheat, my assistance in constructing a dwelling for your expertly tanned deer hides, represented humanity's first economic system. It emerged organically during the Paleolithic era among small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers, operating on a foundational principle of reciprocal need. While elegantly simple in concept, this system was profoundly constrained by what classical economists would later term the double coincidence of wants. For a trade to be successfully executed, you had to locate not only an individual possessing the desired item, but also one who simultaneously desired what you had to offer, in the equivalent quantity, and at the same moment. This fundamental inefficiency acted as a significant brake on economic complexity, limiting the scale and scope of exchange for thousands of years, and binding communities to a largely subsistence-level existence. Yet, the human capacity for innovation should never be underestimated. Even within the rigid confines of a pure barter economy, we can observe the embryonic emergence of primitive value benchmarks. Specific goods, distinguished by their universal utility, aesthetic appeal, or spiritual resonance, began to transcend their immediate function and acquire broader desirability. Obsidian, a volcanic glass capable of being fashioned into lethally sharp tools and ceremonial objects, was traded over astonishing distances in the Neolithic, Near East, with sources in Anatolia found hundreds of miles from their points of use. Similarly, meticulously crafted shell beads from the Mediterranean coast have been discovered in inland graves, adorning individuals who had never glimpsed the sea. These objects were not yet money in the formal sense, but they were evolving into something more significant than mere commodities. They were becoming portable stores of value, potent symbols of social status, and the critical precursors to a revolutionary concept that would reshape the world. The inherent limitations of direct barter became acutely palpable as societies underwent a transformative shift. With the dawn of the agricultural revolution around 10,000 BCE, humanity began to settle, cultivating the land and domesticating animals. This sedentary lifestyle generated the world's first consistent economic surpluses: more grain, more livestock, more textiles and pottery than a single household required for immediate survival. This surplus was the fundamental catalyst for specialization, the division of labor. Not every member of the community needed to toil in the fields. Some could now dedicate themselves to perfecting the craft of pottery, others to weaving, metallurgy, spiritual leadership, or warfare. This specialization, in turn, created an intensified, systemic, and perpetual need for exchange. The village potter needed to feed his family, but the farmer might not require a new set of pots every single day. A more fluid, indirect, and reliable system of exchange was no longer a mere convenience. It had become an absolute necessity for further societal advancement and the flourishing of culture. This pressing, collective need would inevitably lead to one of humanity's most transformative and enduring inventions: money. The inaugural forms of money were not state-minted coins or printed bills, but tangible commodities, items that possessed intrinsic value because they could be consumed, utilized, or worn. In a remarkable display of parallel invention, disparate civilizations across the globe independently converged upon strikingly similar solutions, each tailored to their environment and economy. In the fertile river valleys of agrarian societies, staple foodstuffs like grain and other edibles emerged as a natural monetary standard. In ancient Mesopotamia, the foundational unit of account, the shekel, was originally a specific weight of barley. A laborer could be compensated in measures of grain, which he could then either consume directly or use as a bargaining chip to acquire other goods. Grain was durable for a season, storable in communal silos and easily divisible, but it suffered from significant drawbacks. It was bulky to transport in large quantities and highly susceptible to spoilage, rot, and pestilence. Concurrently, in the pastoral societies that spanned from the savannas of Africa to the highlands of Celtic Europe, livestock, particularly cattle, became the paramount measure of wealth and the primary medium for substantial exchanges. The etymological roots of modern financial terms betray this ancient legacy. The English word pecuniary and fee derive directly from the Latin pecus, meaning cattle. A person's wealth, social standing, and even their potential for marriage were often quantified in heads of cattle. They were, in essence, a walking currency. However, this system too was fraught with practical difficulties. Livestock were not easily divisible. One cannot offer a leg of a cow for a handful of salt. They required vast tracts of land, constant care, and were vulnerable to disease, drought, and theft, making them a volatile store of value. Alongside these staples, a third category of primitive money flourished, one based on decoration, ritual, and durability, objects like cowrie shells, obsidian blades, and beautifully worked beads. Cowrie shells, harvested from the warm waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, stand out as perhaps the most widespread and enduring form of primitive money in human history. Their inherent characteristics made them nearly ideal for the purpose. They were remarkably uniform in size and appearance, incredibly durable, impossible to counterfeit with primitive technology, and difficult to obtain for inland populations, which endowed them with scarcity value. From the bustling markets of ancient China to the kingdoms of Africa, cowrie shells circulated as a trusted medium of exchange for millennia, their use persisting in some parts of Africa well into the 19th century. This global transition from a simple barter system to a commodity-based monetary economy represented a quantum leap in human social organization. It meant that economic value could now be effectively stored over time, decoupling production from immediate consumption. A farmer could sell his surplus grain at harvest, receive a handful of cowrie shells or a promise of a future share of livestock, and hold that abstracted value securely to purchase a new tool, pay a tax, or fund a ceremony months or even years later. Furthermore, the adoption of a common monetary commodity created a universal unit of account, a standard against which the value of all other goods and services could be measured and compared. How many shells is a new pottery jar worth? How does that value relate to a new axe, a day's labor, or a parcel of land? This ability to assign comparable value facilitated more complex long-distance trade, enabled the calculation of debt and credit, and laid the groundwork for rudimentary accounting, forever altering the trajectory of economic history. However, this proto-money was far from perfect. Its value was often inherently unstable and subject to the whims of nature and fortune. A bountiful harvest could glut the market with grain, drastically reducing its purchasing power, while a severe drought could cause its value to skyrocket, triggering economic chaos. A cattle plague could decimate a community's collective wealth overnight. The lack of true standardization was another persistent issue. While one cowrie shell was largely identical to another, one bull was certainly not equal to another in health, strength, or breeding potential, leading to constant negotiation and uncertainty. Moreover, these early monetary forms were deeply embedded in their specific cultural and environmental contexts. What served as a reliable medium of exchange in one region, such as polished jade in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica or large, stone rye wheels on the island of Yap, might be considered worthless or merely decorative in another, complicating inter-regional trade. Despite these significant limitations, the invention of these first monetary instruments was a monumental achievement. It effectively shattered the shackles of the restrictive barter system, unlocking unprecedented potential for trade, capital accumulation, and social stratification. It facilitated the rise of a merchant class, the hoarding of wealth by chieftains and temples, and the funding of larger, more ambitious projects from irrigation works to ceremonial centers. This economic revolution set the stage for the next great leap in human organization, the rise of the first cities, where these nascent economic principles would be tested, refined, and institutionalized on a scale never before seen, creating a crucible for further financial innovation. The evolution from bulky variable commodity money towards more refined, portable, and standardized mediums of exchange was a gradual process, unfolding over centuries as societies grew in complexity and trade networks expanded. In many of the world's advancing civilizations, metals began to assert their dominance as the preferred monetary medium. Initially, it was the raw metal itself, primarily copper, silver, and gold, that was valued. In the sophisticated economies of ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, silver, measured by weight, became the common standard for major transactions and state finance. Pieces of hack silver were cut from larger bars or ornaments, weighed on delicate scales during each transaction, and their purity was often tested. This represented a clear advancement over cattle or grain. Metals were immensely durable, did not spoil, possessed high value in small quantities, and could be divided and melted down into smaller or larger units as needed. However, this system remained cumbersome. Every market transaction required a set of scales and weights, and there was a constant risk of fraud through the use of impure metals or shaved weights. The need for greater efficiency, trust, and standardization in commerce ultimately catalyzed the next great monetary revolution, which occurred around the 7th century BCE, in the powerful and wealthy kingdom of Lydia, located in western Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. The Lydians were fortunate to have abundant natural deposits of electrum, a striking pale yellow alloy of gold and silver found in the riverbeds of their territory. It was from this native metal that the Lydian kings, likely under King Alyattes, made a conceptual leap that would resonate through history. They began producing standardized pieces of electrum of consistent weight, stamping them with official marks, such as the head of a lion, the royal symbol. These stamped lumps were the world's first coins. This act was revolutionary. The value of the metal was no longer just in its substance, it was now also in the guarantee imprinted upon it. The trust in the intrinsic value of the electrum was now seamlessly transferred to trust in the authority and integrity of the king who issued it. The state had officially entered the monetary arena, taking responsibility for guaranteeing weight and purity. Money had been transformed from a simple commodity into a token, a symbol of sovereign power and a tool of state policy. This innovation spread with remarkable speed across the Greek world and beyond, adopted and refined by city-states like Aegina, Athens, and Corinth, each minting their own distinctive coins, often featuring patron deities or civic symbols. The Romans would later adopt and systematize coinage on an unprecedented scale, using it to pay their vast armies and administer their empire, effectively binding their economy together with a uniform currency. The psychological and social impact of coinage was profound. It further abstracted the concept of value, moving it one step further from a tangible good to a state-backed representation. It facilitated taxation, enabled the efficient payment of soldiers and civil servants, and dramatically boosted trade by reducing transaction costs and building trust between strangers. The invention of coinage in Lydia was not an isolated event, but the logical culmination of millennia of economic experimentation. From the first bartered obsidian core to the standardized shekel of barley, it represented a fundamental shift towards a more abstract, efficient, and state-controlled economic system, paving the way for the complex financial instruments, credit systems, and market economies of the classical world and beyond. The genie of money was now out of the bottle, and there would be no turning back. The stage was now decisively set for economic life to accelerate, intertwining with the fates of empires and the daily lives of citizens in ways our Paleolithic ancestors could never have imagined, forever altering the human trajectory. Thank you for watching this comprehensive exploration of the genesis of trade and the first forms of money. If you found this deep dive into our economic origins enlightening, please support this channel by subscribing and giving this video a like. It helps immensely in bringing more content like this to you. In our next lecture, we will travel to the dawn of urban civilization to explore the economy of the first cities, Catalhoyuk and Jericho. We will examine how the concentration of thousands of people in one place created entirely new economic challenges and innovations, from property rights and division of labor to the earliest evidence of urban planning and trade networks. Join us to continue the story.